Hello and welcome everybody here for our Learn with the Nerd session. We're going to be getting into Power BI reporting. And you might be a little thrown off by me introducing it in that way and fashion, but at the end of the day, that is really what we're talking about here. And what I mean is, of course, when we think about the Power BI service and what reporting tools we have at our disposal, we really have effectively two options. It could be argued there could be more here, but we're going to stick to two of them. And that's going to be Power BI interactive reports. Pretty traditional, effective, simple, very popular. Anyone using Power BI desktop proper, you know the reports I'm describing and talking about. But there's a second option here. Most of you are probably aware of this, right? The term here is going to be paginated reports, right? And the way we go about this is using the Power BI report builder application. And for those who want a little more of a nostalgic conversation, we're effectively talking about SSRS framework here, right? So this is a reporting framework that has been around for a very long time. And paginated reports can offer us opportunities that Power BI interactive reports really cannot. But let's take an opportunity and kind of discuss that, right? When we think of the world of Power BI right now in these interactive reports, it's kind of in the name, isn't it, right? These reports are fantastic. They allow for just a plethora, just a massive range of connectivity for various different sources, right? I'm talking about Power BI desktop. We're talking about the Power Query Editor. This just really opens up the landscape on what we can connect to. We bring this into what's called the semantic layer. We can transform it, we can shape it, and then we do modeling. A fantastic tool. We don't need to go into greater depth. We have tons of videos and tons of content around that. It is a fantastic tool. But from a visualization perspective, these reports, we have a ton of visuals, right? Over 30 plus just out of the box baked into Power BI desktop, and then over 300 available in the custom visual marketplace. And these extending from your classical gauges to your pie charts, to your slicers, to your maps, the list just goes on and on. But it is very much an aggregate style reporting. Yes, we have some tabular visualizations, and right out of the box, you have a table and a matrix. You have a card visuals, and these are very tabular oriented. And they effectively work exactly as they need to, right? And they can work in high levels of detail. So we do have this functionality available within Power BI interactive reports. But if we consider the audience, sometimes we might need a more traditional need here, more of an operational style report, right? Especially for new organizations that are maybe making that transition and they want to go into the Power BI service and they want to kind of invest in this for their future, for the adoption and have it be successful. Maybe a full transition over to Power BI interactive reports isn't really the right answer for right now. Sometimes it becomes a wish list, an item that we want to move towards. But remember, these reports we're building, they're for the audience, right? We know the faces of who we're trying to develop these reports for, who we're trying to help answer their questions. So we really want to make sure we're considering that audience, and sometimes just kind of making a full forceful move over is not the right decision, right? You can take I would describe it as a medium leap over into the space if you needed to. And even for those who've just been kind of working with Power BI service and using Power BI interactive reports for the longest time, this might answer some opportunities that you haven't really discovered where Power BI is a strength. And some of those things, like I said, not just in the need for operational reporting, where it's just focused on tabular, we're focused on line item reporting, which is really going to be one of the strengths of paginated reports, but also exportation. How do our users want to consume this? Right? Do they want to strictly just go to a web browser and interact with the report, which is predominantly the way and fashion that we do this with Power BI interactive reports? Yes, of course, there is an export capability within this. You can do PDF. There's also the other extracts for like Excel where you can kind of work with that. But when we really think about tabular line item reporting, Power BI can fail a little bit in this regard as an export, unless you're doing export to PowerPoint Live, which isn't really an export at this point. You're probably using it as a presentation aid. These are just effectively static images, right? When we do an export to PDF, it's what your report looks like right on that screen. So if you have a table or a matrix and there's a scrollable element to it because there's more records that can fit in the display, you're not gonna have access to that, right? Unless you're actually consuming this through the web. So there very well might be scenarios where the consumption means is for either printability, or you actually want an export into a file type in which you receive all of these transactions that are part of maybe a table or a matrix. And this is really where paginated reports shines, right? So there's a couple of items there. A couple of reasons that you might want to go into this space. I'll include a little checklist as part of the download for this that kind of has a list of things that, hey, if you're needing to do this, if you're needing to do this, like a checklist of if these are the items you're considering, then Paginated Reports is really going to be an option that you need to consider. So I'll include that in the download here. We won't go through it here together, but I'll make sure it's available to you for those resources that you can go over. So that's what today's all about. To expose you, not necessarily going into the kind of the basics of Paginated Reports, but we're going to expose ourselves to actual Paginated Reports, but for something very specific, something I've actually already mentioned in this call already, in this workshop we're going to be going through today, this Learn with the Nerds, and that is going to be the Power Query Editor. So, for those of you who already know Paginated Reports and you've been working in Paginated Reports, we know we have a couple of organic sources available to us, right? Azure SQL Database, Azure Synapse Analytics, Azure Analysis Services, we have ODBC drivers, right? There's a couple of like default connections that we can just connect to. There's not a lot, 6 or 7, that's it. And then we had a pretty big update, probably 2 years, maybe a little more than 2 years ago, where we had the ability now to connect to semantic models. And the reason for this was just to really just open up that door of sources we can work with. And that door really just led to another door, because what it was is if you have a source that you want to connect to and you want to create a paginated report for, well, in that regard, what you needed to do was go to Power BI Desktop first. So you actually needed to go and leverage a Power BI interactive report, develop a semantic model, deploy that out to the service, and once that's done, then you could connect to it with your paginated report itself. A very tried and true method. It's been very successful. To be honest, it just opened up so many doors and really did make paginated reports extremely successful, right? But now we have an opportunity that we can actually work directly in paginated and not have the need to go into Power BI desktops and create semantic models. Does that mean that that process is going to completely end? It's going to halt? No, right? If you're going to be working and having a semantic model that you know that you're going to create your traditional interactive reports with, and you're also going to develop your more paginated style reports, then absolutely, it makes sense, right? Develop that semantic model and you can build both styles of reports off of one centralized source. And that just makes absolute sense, right? But in certain scenarios, when you're really considering the reporting requirements and you know you're not going to develop and create a Power BI interactive report, then why go through those extra steps if you don't need to, right? Why, if maybe you're getting new into this space and you don't know how to use Power BI Desktop, you don't know how to curate semantic models, why do you have to go that route? Well, you don't anymore. The power of the Power Query Editor, right? Using power multiple times there. The Power Query Editor is now available to us, generally available within Paginated Reports. In the Power BI Report Builder application, we can now connect to all those sources that we're familiar with Power BI right from Paginated Reports itself. We don't need to take any extra steps. We can connect to these sources. We can leverage the transformative capabilities of the Power Query Editor, and we can create our own data sets that we can then develop our Paginated Reports for. This is what our focus will be today. And effectively, right? If you want to have an additional challenge to this, the examples that we're going to be going through, well, one of the examples, the main example we're going to be going through is effectively a reimagining of one of the labs in our paginated reports, our paginated reports in a day class. It's going to be lab, I think it's 5A, right? This was meant to be like this very all-encompassing lab in which we kind of put together all the skills that we've learned up until this point into one kind of final sales-oriented paginated report itself. So we're going to reimagine that, but do it all leveraging the Power Query Editor. Before it was, hey, we've got a semantic model here for Power BI, let's deploy that out to the service and we'll connect to it, and that's how we developed it. So we're gonna see, I will show you that solution file to remind you, but the extra assignment here is we're reimagining this one lab using this Power Query Editor experience. You could go through the entire class now and say, you know what, I'm gonna do this with the Power Query Editor, right? One also thing to kind of consider is, let's focus on one of the sources, Azure SQL Database, let's say. We have an option directly in Paginated Reports to connect to that Azure SQL Database. And this brings up what's called the Relational Query Designer. I really enjoy it. I think it's nice. It's easy to use. It automatically does joins. You can do group bys. You can do aliases. You can do filtering. It's a great query builder. It really is. But if maybe you have a more refined skill set and you're more comfortable with Power Query because you've been using this with Power BI, instead of connecting to those default sources, you can actually go ahead and leverage Power Query Editor, because now you can be in a space in which you might feel a little more comfortable in using these transformative capabilities, right? Like I said, love the query builder, the relational one, fantastic, good to use, but even in those circumstances, there might be a real use case where using Power Query just makes better sense. But that being said, there's some nuances to this. Just learning curves. This is a fresh feature. As of this recording, it's only been generally available for a little over, I think, a month and a half, 2 months. Very new, so we could see some adjustments, amendments, and additional features added to the mix, but this is pretty stellar. So we're gonna have to learn how this data set actually gets created. There are some nuances to that. How can we go ahead and leverage query parameters? There's some nuances to that. But then after the fact, once we get accustomed and kind of more understand what that process looks like, once you get past the data set creation and the idea of how to leverage parameters here with this new Power Query Editor experience, the rest of the Paginated Reports process remains the same. So any and all skill sets that you had, that you've garnered yourself using whatever sources you need, those still come into play here, right? So it's just really kind of understanding and knowing that beginning piece, that getting data stage. And that is what we're gonna dive into. That's what we're gonna look at. And that's what we're gonna be doing here with the Report Builder tool. So why don't you go ahead, let's sneak over and let me show you first the solution, basically what we're gonna be moving towards in this example. All right, I find myself over here in the Power BI Report Builder. You do need to make sure you at minimum have the September 2024 version of this tool in order to have access to the GA feature of this. You definitely wanna make sure of that. When they did it as a preview, there were some kind of bugs, some limitations there. So make sure September 2024 Power BI Report Builder at minimum, right? Here we are, we can see this is the solution. As I mentioned, we're gonna reimagine the finalized report that we find in Module 5A of the Paginated Reports in a Day class. And it basically ends up looking something like this, right? A report, as you can see, we have a parameter just there at the top. It's a drop-down parameter that allows us to filter by a fiscal year to see the breakdown of sales by salespersons grouped by country, right? That's the idea. That's what we're meant to accomplish. We may not get to the very end, maybe some of the more aesthetical things to this, right? But we're definitely gonna make sure the data's there, the structure for the most part is there, just to nail that down. And like I said, the entire Paginated Reports in a Day class is available to you on our on-demand learning platform. So definitely feel free, once again, as I mentioned, to try to follow along with me, but do the whole thing using the Power Query Editor, right? Kind of really challenge yourselves. There's steps, of course, in the labs, but now with this new feature, it really puts a challenge on you to interpret, how do we accomplish this, right? So definitely a good thing to do. We're gonna do one of the labs, taking that into consideration. But this is really what we're gonna be moving towards. Like I said, it's the final of Lab 5A from the Paginated Reports in a Day class. So this is the goal, this is what we're moving towards. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this down for now. Now to begin this process, in the downloads, not all the files that you see here will be available. I know we'll have most of these and I am gonna add some more to it, but you definitely will have this start RDL, right? This is gonna go ahead, if you open this up, this will get you set with a starting file, and you can see I'm gonna bring this up right on my screen. It's actually technically the completed Module 2B from the Paginated Reports in a Day class. But this is gonna go ahead and have just a standard little template. We got a little header action going on, some things that we will manipulate, but it just gives a little bit of framework to it. That's it, right? We're gonna work within these constraints, if you will, just to make sure everything fits nicely, looks nicely, and that's the idea around this. So let's go ahead and just get started with the process. So the new feature that we are talking about, that's also important and critical that we're gathering for today's session, is gonna be found right here, right? You can see under the data tab, we have all the traditional sources that we know and expect. Nothing's really changed here. These are the organic items available to us. We of course have the option here on OneLake, right? This has been updated, so we have the ability of connecting to semantic models. This is the kind of that big change that happened with Paginated Reports that opened up the door to all the sources, but you had to go through Power BI first. And also we have the ability of connecting to lakehouse warehouses. You can also get into those KQL databases, as well as kind of a more historical thing, data marts, so that's also there. But of course, we've done a lot of content around Fabric and those corresponding kind of workloads, lakehouse warehouses. We haven't really done much on KQL databases, but it's nice to know Paginating can directly connect to those elements as well. Maybe something on that later on. But this, just next door, is what we're talking about, right here. Get data, right? The same verbiage, same phrasing as we would find in the Power BI desktop tool. And when we click on it, we do get that familial experience, right? You can see get data. It's going to bring up a list of available options, kind of like the more popular ones. And you can, of course, go over here and hit view more to break down and get this much larger list of items available to us with categories that you can kind of break this down so you can streamline what you're looking at, because, I mean, it's a large list, which is an awesome thing to have problems with. You can see they have even beta options, preview options. And I imagine that we're going to see this as we get those updates for connections within Power BI. I assume, maybe not immediately, but we should see updates come here to this Power Query inside of Paginated Reports, which is amazing. So what are we going to connect to? I mean, there are a ton of options here, guys. Initially, I went through and we were using an Azure SQL database, which I thought did have value because, as mentioned, there may be times when, yes, you want to connect an Azure SQL database, but still, if the level and need of transformation is great, it could make sense and could be a little bit easier for you bringing it in via Power Query. But we've changed this up. I wanted to do something that also kind of showcases a very common thing. I think it reaches a large majority of audience members, is leveraging a file, which is really cool, right? If we ever needed to use a file inside Paginated Reports, sometimes you had to go and route and do like a class, like an ODBC connector that had to be configured. You have to have the driver and all that stuff, but it's never been easier. And there's some really nice integration with OneDrive built right in. So if we look, we are going to leverage the source that's in our files here, this little Excel workbook. I just kind of curated it, brought it in. This is what we're going to be using, but we're not going to be pointing to this as like an on-prem file. We're not going to point to a file location on my machine. We're going to actually use this in OneDrive. Now, of course, I'm not going to have you go and open up OneDrive and upload this. We're going to let Paginated Reports do that for us. Now, if you wanted a little bit more granular control on where this is going to be saved, of course, yes, take the time, locate somewhere, create a folder, however it is, and you can upload this there. But I'm going to show you that this will do this automatically for us in kind of a default location. So that's the file we're going to use. Let's take a gander at what it's got by going through this in the Get Data experience. So I'm going to go ahead in the upper left corner. I'm going to hit Excel Workbook. If you don't see it, just make sure you can type this out. It'll kind of filter down what we're looking at. We're going to go into this Excel Workbook, and you can see it provides me the option saying enter the file path or URL. You can see I can either choose link to a file, which if you want you can browse, absolutely, or you can upload. So what I'm going to do is literally you can either hit browse there, or I can literally just grab this, drag and drop it right into this location, and you see it's giving a moment, it's uploading, and in a moment this will have been saved up into actual OneDrive itself. If you want, you can see the location, hitting the ellipsis, going into open file location. It's going to prompt me just to sign in with my user credentials, so grant me 1 second to do that. And there we go, I've signed in. I just had to get that taken care of, a little single sign-on action. And you can see, here's the very file. It's uploaded here. The path is just apps, Microsoft Power Query, uploaded file. So by default, this is just where it places this. You can see that this is an example of a folder I connect to it, and like an old example when this was in preview and beta. But this is where it stores it, right? So if you're fine with that, absolutely, kind of proceed as you will. But don't forget, if you wanted, you could have just created your own folder, uploaded this file manually, and just pointed to that location by browsing. So you got some choices here. I'm gonna leave it to the default, but this is the item that we are connecting to. That would be for the sake of like using the data gateway purposes. This will kind of indicate, well, where is this file located, right? And also, who knows, maybe you're gonna use this for other reports. So rather than upload it, right, getting duplicates, you can just browse here and know that, hey, that's where these resources are located. So that's there. I'm just gonna close out a little extra window that popped up. And you can see from me that the connection credentials is kind of already kind of in place. It's been saved here because I have connected to this. It may be at a screen where it's asking you to sign in. Interesting enough, even though you might already be signed in to the Paginated Report, the report builder tool, it may ask you here, just sign in, use your single sign-on, whatever, and it'll remember this. Just like other Power BI connections, which are retained in the connection section of the service, this is remembered for you. So it's really nice. And let's go ahead and hit next, and we will see that we now find ourselves in a very familiar space if you're coming from either a Power BI desktop background, or maybe you're more familiar with Power BI data flows in the service. We're in the Power Creator. Well, technically we're in the Navigator experience right now, where I'm looking at this Excel workbook and I can choose from the available tables and sheets to go with. And we're gonna go ahead and choose the following. We're gonna grab the tables basically, right? I got dim date, dim employee, dim sales territory, fact seller quota, and fact reseller sales, right? All of these are basically going to kind of bring together, we're going to manipulate so that we can create a data set. And I need to discuss that a little bit more. We'll do that in a moment, but let's go ahead and hit transform data. So now we've left the navigator and we are in that Power Query Editor proper. This is that nostalgic area, but let's pause for a moment, right? Even if you're rolling ahead, going super quick, moving, there's some things that you may not understand around this data set. It's important. I'll discuss that as we go through it, but here is the big piece of the puzzle, right? This is one of those nuances that I was discussing. When you make a connection here via the Power Query Editor, this will create a singular data set. So what determines what that data set is? It's actually whatever is going to be the last query or table in your list. So as of right now, right, if we were to just as is go ahead and hit create, we're not going to end up with 5 data sets. That's not how this is going to work. It's going to have one data set that's going to be called fact reseller sales, because that is the final object in this list of items. So that's the first thing to note. Does that mean we're limited? We can only use this Power Query Editor one time and that's it, once and done? No. It just means within this experience, we want to basically connect to data and bring in all the various things that we know we want to work with. Now, granted, let's say you forgot something, it's fine. Get data is here. So you can say, oh, you know what? I forgot one more table I need to get. Hit get data, recent sources, whichever, and you can bring it in. But consider this its own kind of isolated scenario here. These are the items we can work with that'll result in one data set, and that's going to be whatever's at the bottom. So a lot of times, more than likely, if you've got multiple tables in here, you're probably going to be doing some form of combining data operation, which is absolutely what we're going to be doing. And that involves us creating probably a new table, right? So when we get to that process and we get to merging, we'll talk about that a little bit more. We're actually going to have a 6th query or table here, and it's going to be the very bottom, and that's going to be our main data set, and that's what we're going to be using. And eventually we're going to create a second data set via get data, but we have to go through that experience once again. We can't come back in here and make some changes, because remember, one get data experience will result in one data set, and that's whatever the bottom query or table is. First nuance there, right? We'll get to more as we move through this process. So to get this part going, let's just do some quick renaming of these items. I'm going to go ahead, and for those, a little less familiar, if we just had a Learn with the Nerds with Mitchell, and in that class we focus on data modeling. We talked about dimensions and fact tables, so you can see some of the naming convention here kind of follows in that logic. We're going to go ahead and clean that up, and we're going to remove the dimension nomenclature and the fact, and some of them will rename here, right? We're going to try to once again fall in line a little bit with what's going on in the Paginated Report demonstration, in case anyone tries to watch that back and once again mimic this and use this as a challenge. So we'll start at the beginning. Dim date, this one actually pretty simple, just removing the dim prefix there, so that's gone. As we move down the line, we're going to go to fact reseller quota. That's simply going to turn into the word target. Dim employee, we're going to rename to salesperson. And then dim sales territory, we're going to go ahead and call this our, put this in here. We're just going to call it sales territory. So I'm going to get rid of the dim prefix once again. And then fact reseller sales, we're just going to call sales. All right. Just like that. So just renaming the items. And now what we're going to do is we're going to move through this process with a little bit of focus. Like I said, we're not going to do like a Power Query 101. So we're just going to kind of do some stuff. We're going to clean stuff up. If this is a brand new experience, follow along, absolutely, but don't forget, we've got so many classes out there, more introduction to Power BI, when maybe you can get a more introductory view of Power Query. So I'm going to go through it, I think, at a somewhat introductory level, and remember, you're going to be able to watch this on demand, so your own pace and your own leisure, so feel free. But like I said, the focus isn't necessarily like the beginning. Now, this is a new feature, right? So I am going to talk about it, so you should all be able to follow along. But starting with date, one of the main elements we're going to be doing here to mimic what we saw inside of the report itself is we had this column, it was the fiscal year. So I'm going to go ahead right off the bat and start by cleaning this up a little bit. So let's take care of that process. I'm going to go here and go to choose columns, and we're going to focus just on our fiscal related information. So I'm only going to keep the date key, full date alternate key, we're definitely going to rename that one. And then if we continue down the way, I'm just going to bring in fiscal quarter, fiscal year, and fiscal semester. That's it. Now that being said, if you want to have a little more fun, a little bit more freedom, if you want to kind of practice with different type of columns for the sake of parameterization purposes, feel free, right? Include more. Maybe though in this demonstration, follow along with me. When you revisit this, maybe challenge yourself a little bit in that regard. Now the one thing we really need to add into the mix here is going to be one column, right? In the example, it wasn't a numeric data type, it was actually a text data type that we use for a parameter, right? This is gonna be the FY, so it was like fiscal year 2019, 2020. That's what we saw in the actual report itself. So we're gonna mimic that process, right? Is that a requirement? Not necessarily, right? You've got 2019 in here. The main difference is you're talking about an integer column versus a text column. To be honest, there could be some niceties in using a numeric for sorting purposes, but it's okay. This will introduce another topic that we can get into later when we go to create our second data set around parameterization. So for now, to set up that scenario, we're just gonna create a new column. It's gonna become our new fiscal year, and all it is gonna be taking this value, fiscal year, we're just gonna put a prefix in front of it. Multiple ways you can do this. You could create a custom column and just hard code a literal string in front of this and concatenate it. But like I said, one thing that I don't see a lot of people often leverage is if you go to the add column section, there's a section here called formatting. And in here, you can actually simply add a prefix or a suffix. Nice, plain and easy. I've hovered over the fiscal year column. That's what's selected. I've chosen the prefix option and I just put FY. Just like that, and you're gonna see a new column is created for me, FY 2019, exactly what we're looking for, and I'm gonna go ahead and remove this fiscal year column. Now, for some of you who are new, you might be wondering, hold on, I'm gonna call this one fiscal year. We're just literally replacing it. How are you able to delete that column? You just derived fiscal year, this new one, you just made it from the other one. Isn't there a dependency there? Kind of, but Power Query is a little bit different on how it handles dependencies. Think about this section on the right-hand side here. These are called named expressions, and there's definitions for them. Pretty much they're like little tables in time. Each one of this is its own table. So at the moment when we created our new column, which was right here, insert prefix, look what's there. Fiscal year exists. So at the moment of this transformation, the column that's required for it is there. We just don't need it anymore, right? So the idea of dependencies, a little bit different, and I actually really like it. So we've got our fiscal year, we've got a date. We did mention we'll do some renaming here. Full date, alternate key, not the best. I'm just gonna call this date because that's literally what it is. Date key and date are actually the exact same thing, just one is a numeric representation and date is just an actual date data type, right? So we've got a couple things in here. Like I said, there's freedom. You saw how many columns we got rid of. You have some freedom to explore this even more if you decide to. We're gonna stick to this. Effectively, this is what we're gonna be using for our merge operation once we get down to this. The next one here is targets. Now this one we're gonna take a little bit differently. We're really just gonna manipulate this one to serve our purposes. This effectively just kind of has a singular month attribute for multiple sales individuals, but we're gonna kind of augment this so it fits a little bit better within our data set. And to do this, because it would be a little bit more involved, a little bit more advanced, we're gonna borrow some code that I've already created. So inside of our actual resources, you will find a Word document. Let me bring that up here. It just says Power Query code, and we're gonna go ahead and open this up. Once again, also, if you're not familiar with the Power Query editor, you effectively are using a user interface to generate code. That's how this works. Usually you can get away with just using the UI. It is so friendly and so efficient, but in more advanced scenarios, you may actually have to go into the code and make some alterations yourself. In this case, not really using it for that purpose. We're gonna see how you can actually borrow code from existing successful code and implement it into your own. So this is me who's run through the scenario already. We have the logic in here and we're gonna take this and just paste it in and reuse this work. You can use this across multiple reports, right? The main thing is you might have to adjust some of the code if it's not exactly the same. Maybe the names of your columns are different. That would be a very simple process. But we should be able to go ahead, highlight from the very beginning under the target table bold word, so not that, all the way down to the bottom. We should be able to highlight this. So I'm gonna copy this. Back over inside the actual paginated report itself with target selected, I'm gonna go ahead and go to the home ribbon and hit advanced editor. Now also just in case, since we're here, this is where you go to see the entirety of your code for the highlighted table in question. So if you wanted to go in here and examine what code's there, maybe someone's asking you, hey, I know you did this, you were working with this table and you got it cleaned up, I kind of need to do something similar, could you share that with me? This is where you would go. Open up the report, go to the mashup or the query engine here and go to the advanced editor and you can copy whatever it is and you can send that right over. You'll notice though, once again, there could be some elements with naming convention, as right here, if we look, change column 1 is the name of this step, which it's kind of tough to see in the background, but you can see literally these names match up with what's on the applied steps. But change column steps equals, and you can see pretty much when you use and strictly lean on the user interface to generate this code, this step will always reference the previous. So the name of this step is change column type, and if you look, it's performing a transform column types. That's the function it's leveraging, and it's doing it against navigation 1, which if you look, navigation 1 is the name of the previous step, and back and forth, back and forth. So for us, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna highlight this lines 5 and 6, and I'm going to delete them. And at the end of line 4, I'm gonna simply add a comma, because we are gonna add some steps. So our expectation here is when we paste this in, it's gonna be a new step name that should be referencing the prior one, column, changed column type. So I'm gonna paste in what we have. The new step is called added custom. It's doing an add column transform, and you can see it's referencing changed column type. Now, for any reason, your step that's prior to this, for me it's on line 4, is called something else. Maybe you are messing around doing some stuff and it says like change column type 1 or 2 or something. If you want this code to work, all you need to do is make it so that this piece of code right here matches whatever the code is, whatever the name is right here. That's it. So if for some reason it doesn't work, that's all you need to do. But mine does. I hit OK, and all of that work is translated, and we have this information ready and available for us to leverage. So another example where I love Power Query, how you can very easily share code, leverage code. You can find some stuff online that you can kind of take advantage of. We created our own date table. We basically brought it in from the Excel workbook, but you could leverage, there's tons of code out there. We kind of showcased that in the previous Learn with the Nerds. There's tons of code out there to allow you to create date tables. You could literally just do that and import it in nice, simple, and easy. So for us, we did our own thing, but now target is exactly where it needs to be. So let's continue, right? Next one here is gonna be our salesperson. So the first things first, this is actually the dim employee table, so there's actually a ton more than just salespersons. You can see there's various different columns and fields, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna leverage the field over here on the right. It's called salesperson flag, and we're simply gonna toggle this to true. And there's a slight nuance and difference here to Power BI's Power Query Editor, in that Power Query lets you see the first 1,000 rows. The preview here in Paginated Reports is 100 rows. You can see in the bottom left corner, it tells you we have 13 columns in this table, and we're looking at just 100 rows, 99 plus. That's it. That's what we do with the preview. So naturally, when I drop down this list, which is meant to showcase a list of distinct values, it's only showing me false because it only sees the first 100. But if I go load more, it's gonna go do kind of a one-time in-memory lookup and get me the list. And there's my true, because the salesperson's list is a small fraction of what we have in overall employees, but that's all I care about. So we have, with one swift motion, just gone ahead and set this up so it is only our salespersons, right? And let's clean up some of these columns that we don't need. There is a lot of options in here, so we're gonna clean this up. I'm gonna hit choose columns, all right? And let's go ahead and decide what we're looking for. I'll keep, for the moment, our employee key. All right, we'll keep that. I'm gonna keep let's keep sales territory key. You'll see why in a moment. First name, last name. We're gonna do something with that there real quick. I'll go ahead and keep that title, so we have that as well. And why don't we also go ahead and simply just grab their email address. And scrolling down, I'm also gonna grab, the department name is all the same. It's all just sales. So we'll go ahead and leave it as such. So just go ahead. We have position, we have title. Yeah, I feel good about this. Let's go ahead and hit OK. Just narrowing this down. Perfect. And then something else we're gonna do here is we're actually gonna do our first merge operation. Now in this case, we don't need to kind of do much consideration. We're just gonna merge into it. And what we're gonna be merging into it is gonna come from our sales territory table. A very small, simple table. The idea is we have sales territory keys, which showcase kind of what region these individuals are a part of, right? So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna merge into this table so we can get that identification. Basically, we just wanna go ahead and get their group. That's the main thing we wanna get into, so that's what we're gonna bring into the mix. If you wanna extend this and go even further and kind of bring in other levels of the hierarchy, feel perfectly free to do that. In some of the labs, I think it was in the Paginated Reports lab in the beginning, you end up looking at cascading parameters, and we use the same concept here. So if you want to challenge yourself, go another level here, which cascading parameters absolutely works. Actually, it doesn't really have to do anything with this new experience. You still follow the same practices as you would with any Paginated Report cascading parameter. But for here, we're going to go ahead and merge, and that can be found inside the home ribbon. If you go to the right-hand side, we're going to use the default merge option here. Just click that. Our top table is salesperson. Our right table is going to go ahead and be sales territory. We are going to do a left join. The idea here is let me keep all of the salespersons that I have in my salesperson table and only bring back matches that I find from my sales territory. And the column in question we're going to use to define this relationship, kind of the matching criteria, is going to be sales territory key and sales territory key, as you probably have imagined. And everything finds a match. We can see it due to the preview down below. And we get that classic kind of packed object, that table object in here. And we're left to decide, okay, when we find matches, which values from the sales territory table do you want, right? For those SQL people out there, this is like your joins, right? We just did a left join. So now we're kind of modifying, if you will, the select statement. What columns from the new table do I want to make part of this data set? So I'm going to go ahead and expand sales territory. We're going to go ahead, and in this case, we're just going to choose sales territory group. But if you want to bring in more, feel free. This could provide you the opportunity to leverage and utilize maybe some cascading parameters logic. We won't be doing it in this scenario today, but it just gives you the chance to do that. So I've got this in here. Perfect. This will come into play later. To be honest, I think we're in good shape. I think we have everything we need for this table. You know what? One more thing we're going to be doing. Something that can make our lives a little bit easier. That being said, we could do this in the Paginated Report side, right? After we're done with the query editor, once we get into, like, say, the data set properties, there are calculated columns. We cover that in other classes. We are going to do it together here for a different reason, but we could leave this and kind of accomplish this over there, but that would actually just create another column. So we would have like our first name, last name, and then we would create a calculated column on top of it. It works, it's fine, but let's make it as efficient as possible. And let's just create our salesperson name right here. So I'm gonna go ahead, and there's a couple ways we can go about this once again, but I'm gonna hit add column, and I'm gonna go with the custom column option. You could go column from example. You could double click both of these and do kind of a merge option between them, but I'm gonna hit the custom column option, and we're gonna call this salesperson. And it is just going to be a combination of the first name and the last name, but we obviously want to make sure we add a little space in between. So to do this, I'm going to put my cursor down in the code box down below, and we're going to go ahead and double click on first name. We're going to go with an ampersand. I'm going to use the double quotes to include a literal string, and between these pair of double quotes, I'm just going to hit the space bar, literally inputting a space in here. And we're going to go ahead and do one more ampersand, and we're going to double click that last name. So first name, space, last name. We can hit OK. We can look at this and validate, yes, it's looking good. Anytime I see this ABC123, doesn't matter if it's paginated, doesn't matter if it's Power BI, that's in any data type, I resolve it. I think it's the best practice there. So I'm going to switch this to naturally a text. And now, well, I'll do one more thing. I'm going to move it over here because I feel it fits a little bit better over by the names. Now I feel good about our salesperson, right? So we're solid, we're in good order. We don't really need to do anything here around sales territory. We've actually taken everything that's valuable to us from here and brought it over to salesperson. Now, since we talked about dependencies before, we can't really just get rid of sales territory here. Dependencies don't work like that across tables. They're effectively across the columns within those, like the applied steps elements in there. So we still need this. It's going to be part of the refresh. If a new sales territory is available and a salesperson ends up getting assigned to it, then that's good. We want to pick that up. So we need to keep this as is here. So let's move down to the sales option, right? This is a pretty big one. This is a pretty important one. We're actually going to start our main file based off of this. Now, there's a couple of things that we don't need. So we're going to go ahead and kind of clean up some of the columns first. So let's take care of that. I'm going to start with our home ribbon. Let's go ahead and hit choose columns. We're going to start by deselecting everything. We're going to go piece by piece. Now, if you want to, this is based off of effectively the AdventureWorks database, all this data. So if you want to keep things like product key, feel free, right? We're not going to be using the product key, so I won't bring it in, but you could include it if you wanted to bring in that column as well, or that table as well. We're also going to bring in our continuing downwards. We're going to go and grab our employee key. Pretty important, we need that one there. We're gonna go ahead and grab some of the metric related stuff. Now our information is basically gonna be based off of sales amounts, but I'll still include order quantity, unit price, in case anyone wants to go back and leverage that as well and find our sales amount. And why not, we'll do total product cost as well. That's about it, right? So for right now, because we know we're gonna create a relationship over to the date table, we know we're gonna go ahead and create a relationship over into the employee table, the salesperson table. You'll see why in a moment. And then we have the metric elements in play. So I think this is gonna be sufficient for what we're needing to do here for right now, but there's so much more expandable stuff if you wanna bring in, you can feel free to go about and do that, right? All right, so we've chosen our columns. We've got those all situated in sets. What we can do here at this point is basically clean up. Let's actually talk about the 6th data set, right? We know that we're gonna add in a 6th data set in here. So that's what we're gonna bring into the mix. Now sales right here, technically speaking, we could just merge into this and kind of have this become our main data set. It absolutely would work. But this is something we teach in Power BI classes as well around Power Creator. This is something I kind of go by. I like to kind of keep my base tables, if you will, in their kind of original states, right? This is purely my sales table, but as soon as I start adding the employee details in here, as soon as I start adding the date details in here, as soon as we start going down that motion, this isn't just the sales table anymore. It kind of is expanded at that point. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a bin table, like a table that's gonna be the receptacle of all of our merges. So this is gonna be a resultant table. So we are gonna merge, first off the bat, we're gonna merge sales with our employee table, salesperson table, but we're not gonna do it into sales directly. We're gonna create a new object, and we're gonna call that one our main data set. So let's go ahead and start that. We're gonna go over here to merge, but not hit the word merge itself. I'm gonna hit the little drop down arrow, and we're gonna hit merge as new, right? Merge as new is gonna bring up the same UI. Technically, you can modify what is your top table, what's your bottom table, and just in case, pay attention to the wording here. This says this is my left table, and this is my right table. That is specifically for the join kinds, how things will be impacted. So do take that into consideration. We are gonna do a left join here. And we're gonna merge in our salesperson. Now this one right here, pretty straightforward. We're gonna be using our employee key from the salesperson table with our employee key from our merge table here. And we're gonna go ahead and bring these worlds together. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit okay. We're gonna see it's called merge right now. We're gonna make some adjustments on this. Let's go ahead and rename this. I'm just gonna call this as some of the naming convention we use in some of our other classes. DS, representing data sets, _ main, how we use the naming convention here. If you wanna name it something else, please feel free, go right ahead. This is just something we leverage, but you can use any naming convention here you'd like. But this, because right now it is at the very bottom of our list of queries, is going to be what's brought into the actual paginated report, the report data pane over there on the left. So I've got DS main, we've got it in here, I brought in salesperson. When it comes to what we want from the salesperson table, we're really just gonna leverage a couple of items in here, right? Let's go ahead, and from this case, I'm gonna go ahead and expand out the salesperson, so the name. Let's also go ahead and bring in the title, right? There's a couple things, right? We don't want necessarily everything, and technically speaking, anything that we don't choose here, you could have eliminated from the Power Query upstream if you want. That would have kind of made this a little bit more streamlined, but I don't need the employee key. We already have the employee key. We'll probably end up getting rid of it. I do need the sales territory key. Notice it wasn't part of sales. So I'm gonna include that here because I do want to, actually, you know what? We already did the work and the effort. We already brought in the sales information into the employee table, into the salesperson table. So we've already done that work and effort, right? If I hadn't, we could have kept this here, merged the sales territory into, at this point, there's not that big of an impact in this case, but we could have gone that route. I'm not gonna worry about first name, last name, I don't need that, but I am gonna bring in the salesperson, the title itself, and just their group. Just these three, we're gonna bring that into the mix, extending this out. And it's one small thing that I like to do here is, I like to keep my metrics at the very end. So basically these columns, I'm just gonna drag them to the very end, just that they're over there. Let's go ahead and bring unit price. Just, I don't know, I always like to keep those things at the very end there. So let's go ahead and also, salesperson has the .1. That's because it was a column that shared the same name as the table. So I'm just gonna get rid of the .1 element on salesperson, just kind of cleaning that up. So that is going to be our first merge. So now we have our details of our individuals. We have this broken down. Now there is a choice to be made here, right? The next join that we're going to do is we're going to bring in that fiscal year, right? We have the order date, which kind of breaks this down, right? We have the employees that are brought in tied to these items in the order date element here. But what we're going to do is we're really not caring about this at a line item detail in this regard. Now, if you wanted to, you could kind of keep this here, right? You could keep this and you can do exactly what we're about to do, which is to bring in the actual fiscal year column. If you remember, that's the one we had created before. We're going to bring that in right now. Let's do that first and then we'll discuss more about what I mean by the level of detail here. So I'm going to go ahead, we're going to do, and this time we're going to do an actual merge. Right, we did a merge as new before. This time, this is the actual final table. This is going to be our actual our data set table. So I'm good with not creating another new one. I'm going to go with merge. And once again, maybe it makes sense now that we see it. I've got DS main, which represents our final data set. But if I need to make adjustments and changes to other tables in the process, it's now very visible and obvious. If I need to make adjustments to the sales table, there it is. I didn't have to rename it. It's very obvious. I go there. If I need to make changes to the date table, there it is. That's what I mean by usually I'll create, when I'm doing combining data operations like this, I'll keep kind of the base tables in their original state and make a new table, which is the resultant of that combining data operation. So we got main, which has got sales and salesperson together, but now we're gonna bring in information from our date table, and we're gonna go ahead and relationship wise, right? We're gonna go date key to date, and this is gonna be, notice the data type, it's numeric, so it's gonna be over here to order date. We're gonna go ahead and make sure, multiple columns actually got selected there, so I'm gonna make sure order date is selected, and order date here, and date key, perfect, there we go. I'm gonna keep it as a left join. We can see in the preview that everything is matching, so that's good news. Once again, we get the entirety of what the date table is. We're only gonna bring in one column from this, so I'm gonna go ahead and deselect everything and simply bring in that fiscal year. This is what we saw as being used as far as a filter criteria. So that's gonna come into play here. Not necessarily right now. I am gonna move this over here though, so it's to the left of my metrics. Once again, that's just me, it's an aesthetic thing. But that is actually gonna end up being a filter criteria for us. Now, at this stage, we basically have a granular breakdown. You can see if we look at this first salesperson here, these are all sales that are recorded for 2018-0701, right? So July of 2018, these are transactions. And it continues. If we filter this, you'd see you probably have multiple days of transactions for that individual. But in our case, the way this report is going to be, if we remember looking at it, was a breakdown of the total sales for each salesperson within their respective country. In this case, it's called the group here. So we're going to go ahead and actually do that summarization now. Now, this is a choice, if you wanted to, that you could leave for the actual paginated report itself. Right? We could bring in this kind of detail level element, then you'd have to kind of get more into the reporting side of things in which you're doing sums, you have to start working with scopes and everything like that. Not that difficult in this scenario, but like I said, we're going to showcase a couple of additional Power Query settings so that those who are less familiar can see that this can be accomplished. But technically speaking, at this juncture, now granted, the one thing that we are missing here is going to be the sales quota. We're going to bring that in, but we're going to do a little bit of a logic here, where we're going to do a group by. I'm going to go ahead and group by, and at this juncture, because I don't want to do multiple group buys, multiple sums, not really a requirement, and since we're not going to be using unit price and unit product cost, I'm going to get rid of them at this juncture. I just wanted to show them being included at the time if you wanted to kind of go and check other things out. But I'm going to get rid of these because the one that I'm interested in is sales amount. I need that to be summed up for each individual salesperson here. So to do this, we're going to simply go over here into the actual home ribbon. You can see group by is located right here. And we're going to go into the advanced tab. And very similar to aggregations in SQL, think about any sort of columns that are included in the select statement that do not participate in an aggregation. That means we need to include them in a group by clause. So basically anything that we want to group by, we got a list here explicitly. So in our case, because I had sales amount highlighted, it put it here in the group by, but naturally that is the only one we don't want to group by. I want to go ahead and just go piece by piece. We're going to group by the order date key, which technically we don't really need anymore. So I'll probably, you know what, let's clean that one up. We don't need order date key anymore. And technically, and also I don't need order quantity. We got salesperson, we got title, we got sales territory, we got fiscal year. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and we don't need employee key. Well, let's leave employee key. I'm gonna get rid of order quantity. That's another metric we're not gonna be using, so I'm just gonna get rid of that one. So as well as removing total product costs and unit price, and as well, we should do order quantity as well, because those are other metrics that can be kind of a fun thing to challenge ourselves, but we only really, to mimic that report, need sales amounts. I'm also gonna go ahead and remove order date key, right? This is going to, when we go and do a group by, which is gonna be the next thing we accomplish, this is obviously very granular at a day level, but we're gonna roll this up to actually the year level, because that's what we care about. If you did want to keep this granular, if you wanted to break this down even further, not just the total sales by salesperson, but you want to know breaking it down day by day, then this is something that you would need to keep. The more columns we have here in this table, when we attempt to do the group by, naturally, it's going to expand the number of rows we have. Basically what it tries to do is sum up and group by a unique set of rows. Well, if we have day level reporting, then that's gonna basically not gonna shrink this data up too much. We're basically looking at the total sales by day per salesperson. But for our sake, we just wanna really go up to the year level, so I am gonna eliminate order date key. I'm gonna remove this, and then we're gonna go through a group by process by going into the home ribbon and hitting group by. And in this case, we really just need to go to the advanced tab and list out effectively every column we have here other than sales amount, which of course we want to do an aggregation. So we can go employee key, add, and we're just going piece by piece. Salesperson, title, sales territory group, and fiscal year. Just like that. And then lastly, what do we want to actually do an aggregation for? We're going to call this sales, and it's simply going to be a sum of sales amount. And with that being said, this is once again going to basically group all of our records where we have effectively duplicate elements and sum up the sales amount for those. So since we got rid of the date key, if we were to filter this down, let's say to an individual salesperson, we're going to see that these individuals have effectively three, I think most of them, maybe some are missing here, but there's really just 3 years of data that we traverse. So in this case, we're looking at Steven. Steven has 3 entries here, and it's his total sales for 2019, his total sales for 2020, and his total sales for 2021. Had we left the order date key in here, there would be way more than 3 records depending on how many days he's had sales on. And once again, we don't really care about that, but think about it, we did the fiscal year here. Technically, we could have done stuff at the month level, the quarter level, the week level. Like, you can choose the level of detail. We're just kind of mimicking our example here. So that's what we need to do. And once again, here's an important thing too. I just filtered this to look at Steven. Anything we do here are literal rules controlling the data. So let's make sure we delete that. Sometimes you'll use this just for kind of data validation purposes, but we need to eliminate that step we just did because I don't actually want to filter this just to Steven. So over here on the right, I'm going to delete that filtered row step. So we effectively are going to have 3 rows per customer. You can see there's 41 rows in here. This feels good, but we're missing one more element, right? We still need to bring in our quota. That was an element we had, and it's missing. So we have our target table. That's what we want to work with, right? So let's bring that into the mix. We had our sales, and then we brought over the date, we brought over the sales, and the salesperson, pardon me. The trick is we don't have it. This effectively would share a many to many at the day level. So if we would have brought over sales quota at the moment, it would have caused a bit of a problem, and the sum would have been a little odd. Now that we've summed this up to a year level, we can go over. This will expand, right? This is going to expand out of records. We're going to go from 41 rows to something else, right? And you're going to see that, like for instance, that first record, 285. We're going to call it Svi Reiter from North America. You see that sales number there just for 2019. But if there are multiple months of quotas, which there is, right, we're going to see that number is effectively going to be duplicated. So we're going to see that row for 2019 multiple times for each and every one of those months for the actual quota that they have. But once again, we're going to roll that quota up to the yearly level. And that's a big thing because now we're going to need to group by and include the sales. We wouldn't want to do another sum here because that would artificially inflate that sales number, and that would be incorrect. So you have to really be considerate of the process you take here for merging stuff in and consideration of the nature of the relationship between tables. We don't have a true model in here, even with the Power Query Editor coming into play. There's not an actual model in Paginated Reports just because this is present. We only really just get the transformative side here. We don't get the whole like tabular model in here. So let's bring in, right, we got this group by. Let's go ahead and bring in now the target table. So I'm gonna do a merge once again. We're gonna choose our target table. And in this case, we're gonna end up choosing two columns, right? If we were to just choose employee key and employee key, there's really no understanding on which months it needs to group with the years, right? It would be effectively like this Cartesian product that gets created. It wouldn't work out too well. In this case, we want employee key and our fiscal year. It's gonna look for these matches. Now, the way I've done this, just in case, is you effectively highlight a column in question. So let's assume I picked employee key first. It's highlighted there. If I hold the control key on my keyboard, it'll have a little number 2. You can see it in the corner. Our employee key is the first column, our fiscal year is the second. We've effectively created like a compound key, if you will, and you need to make sure those numbers line up down below. Now we've given it a little more description. Hey, look for this employee key and specifically that year, and then it's gonna go ahead and find those matches, which in the sales quota table, there's gonna be a couple because that's currently at the month level. That's okay, we're gonna do another group by there. So I'll hit OK, and as I mentioned, it goes from the 41 rows to the, not entirely certain what the row count goes to. We'll see here in a moment once we expand this. All I care about from here, we don't need employee key, we don't need date key. All I want is the quota amount, and we don't need fiscal year. Those already exist in here. And you'll see we have that expansion here that I was describing. And it's due to the nature of the relationships here, right? In this case, we almost had like a one-to-many in the regard of at a yearly perspective. But once again, look, you can see right here at the top, as I mentioned, you can see there's 4 months of data that was included in the target table for that specific record we discussed. So that 20, that, you know, however much that is, I don't want to count all the spots here, that number has now been duplicated. So we definitely don't want to sum up sales again. So we're going to do a group by, but now sales is one of the columns that we want to group by as well, because we need to get that quota amount. That's our yearly quarter amount. So let's go ahead and do the same process, and we'll include sales amount in the grouping, the sales column. So once again, we're gonna go here, home ribbon, group by, and it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but we'll go to advanced and make our way step by step by step again, just choosing every column other than our quota amount. So I'm gonna just go piece by piece. I said not the most exciting. We're getting this set though. Let's go here. And sales, let me make sure. Employee key, and you can kind of go here if you need to. We got employee key, salesperson, title, sales territory group, fiscal year, and sales. Perfect. And then what do we want? In this case, we're gonna go ahead and name this. Let me make sure I match up with the lab here. We're gonna call this our target. Might have to rename this because it's gonna share the same name, but we're gonna go with a sum of quota amounts. And then we should now shrink back down to those 41 records. So now we've summed up our quotas for the respective fiscal years. And you can see we're back at the 41, we're where we're looking at. To be honest, at this juncture, looking at the exact column names and all that fun stuff, I feel like everything looks good, right? I think we're in a good state here. Now there's more technically to be done here, right? Parameterization. But let's go ahead for right now and just take a look at what this looks like, bringing it into the actual Paginated Report builder itself. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit create. You can see it says DS main created. Now here's another small nuance to this. Let's say you made a small mistake and the bottom table was not the table that you wanted this data set to be created. So you see it says, let's imagine we left salesperson at the bottom. It says salesperson data set has been created. You'll see it here, it'll say salesperson. If you were to go back, so how do we get back to the Power Query Editor in case we need to make adjustments, which technically we still want to do parameterization. Well, the route we would take here is we would go to DS main, we would hit edit mashup, and this brings us right back to the Power Query Editor. Now, for right now, maybe this behavior changes, but whenever you return to this, it does ask you to kind of like re-authenticate, like reconnect to your source. You just need to hit configure connection, and it should just line things right back up. So you shouldn't have to do a ton, and then it's working, right? So let's say you made that mistake, and you would go ahead, literally just so you're aware, you can just drag these tables however you see fit. So if you needed a table to be the data set, you literally just drag it to the bottom. It's as simple as that. But even after you drag it to the bottom, the name of the actual data set will not change. It'll still say DS main is there, right? So that is something that is not going to adjust automatically. If you wanted to change the name of this data set, you actually have to go and right click it, go into the properties, and you can rename it right here. So you can make that adjustment right at this level if you needed to just keep that in mind. Now something has actually, a thought has appeared for me, and I realized there is one more thing that we needed to do. In the actual report that we're aiming to mimic, to be able to kind of match up with, there was not only the sales and the target, there was actually a column called variance. It was just the difference between the two, and technically there's another column called variance percentage. Now, we could do this in multiple ways, right? We could do this in the actual Power Query editor. We could actually do this inside the SSRS, like the paginated report side as well, in doing calculated columns. What we'll do is we'll split the difference. Because I want to show more of the Power Query editor, let's go ahead and create our variance column in the Power Query editor, and then we'll create variance percentage in the actual data set itself so we can see that process. So we already saw, to get back into my data set, I'm going to right click and go to the edit mashup. It's going to prompt me to make that connection again. That's okay. Go ahead and do that real quick. All right. And this one, for those who work with Power BI, you probably know the route we're going to be taking. A couple ways to go about this as well, but I'm just going to go ahead, and this is once again going to be called variance, and it's really just going to be a matter of going into add column. We're going to go ahead and do a custom column. I'm going to call this variance. And it's really just going to be my two items that we just merged. Well, I guess sales was here since the beginning. We're going to take our sales and we're going to subtract from it our target. Right, that's the idea. So I'm literally double clicking the name, column sales, putting a minus in there. Target's the operator. This is going to go ahead and do that math for us. If you want to bust out the old calculator and do those differences, you can. And I'm going to go ahead and set this data type here. Let's go ahead and keep it the same as the other ones. The other ones are using an actual decimal number data type. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? These are all technically currencies. So I'm going to highlight all three of these. And I'm going to switch their data types to a currency. So I'm just going to kind of do that. Now, just in case this isn't actually formatting, this is just data types. So I'm going to switch it over to that. So perfect. So we got our variance, we got that. We could do variance percentage. Literally, that could be something that we get into. That would be a process of literally just doing some division in this regard. But as mentioned, we're going to see how we can accomplish this actually in the field section of the Power Query editor. Normally, we'd take our variance value and divide that by our target value. We could do it right here. But just so we can get some practice, I'm going to hit create. We're going to see that our data set is going to update. So it's going to give us a little message, it's been updated. We should see that variance appear. As soon as I hit OK, variance now shows up. There we go. But we need variance percentage. That was the other piece of the item we want to bring in. So I'm going to go ahead and right click DS main, but not go to the mashup. I'm going to go over here into the actual properties. This is actually also the area that we're going to need to go in order to leverage our parameterization, which we'll talk about that here momentarily, but there's two routes you can take, right? There's one that's a little bit specific to the Power Query editor experience, and that's going to be query parameters. And there's one that's very classical, just paginated reports, so it's nothing special new, and that would be the filters area. So we'll talk about that momentarily. But here I'm interested in adding a variance percentage. Now this is going to come into play in a very specific way, right? We basically did our aggregation already in the Power Query editor for sales and target. Technically, we're not going to use variance in any sort of report. We're going to use it right now. But that's going to come into play when we go into like row totals. Effectively, the paginated report is just kind of seeing this data set as bringing in records. It doesn't necessarily know or understand that an aggregation has occurred on sales and target. We just have done that behind the scenes. You'll see how that comes into play. If you opted for the route of maybe including the date key, like keeping things at the day level, more granular, and then you would need to do some roll up yourself on the paginated side, that would change this, but I'll talk about that once we have to include the sum. So let's go ahead and get our variance percentage here. We're gonna go ahead and hit add, calculated field. I'm going to go into the expression builder here. And once again, this is going to be taking our variance column, the one we just created in the Power Query Editor, and dividing that by the actual target itself. So to make life very easy, you can go over to the field section here on the left-hand side. You see our list of columns, right? And we can just, once again, click. So I can say, I want to select my target, or pardon me, my variance, right? Double click on it, pops it right in there. The operator for division, same as what you'd find in Power Query or DAX and all that fun stuff, /. So I want to divide that by my target, right? That is going to go ahead and give us the actual value that we're looking for. We want to give this a name. So I'm going to go ahead and call this variance, and we can't put spaces, so I'm going to put PCT percentage. And we now have created a column. Now, in this case, we are actually in the data set, in the property, and we've done effectively some sort of arithmetic division. So the report builder will pick that up. So when it comes to like doing kind of column totals, this will actually happen automatically. It won't actually happen for sales or target, as you're going to see when we go through this. But nonetheless, we've actually gone ahead and created this. We now have this in here. It's available to us. So the next piece, parameters, always a critical component when it comes to paginated reports. So in this regard, we know that the filter option here was leveraged through the idea of fiscal year 2019, right? We have this column, it's inside the DS main. You can see it there, it's called fiscal year. You, of course, could just create a report parameter. We're gonna use the get data experience to actually create a date table. We could just create this for ourselves. It's a very simple list, but we want to showcase, of course, making things dynamic. And you could use either the filter option or the query. We're, of course, going to show the query, and I will talk to you about multi-value parameter versus single value, as there's some nuances there on both sides, right? How you set up the report parameter and how you set up the query. That's no different than what you would do in something like a SQL Server connection, but obviously this is different because it's Power Query. So let's go ahead. What we'll do is we'll actually start with our report parameter, right? There's no harm. This doesn't actually attach to anything, but at least starts getting us looking at what this is gonna appear like. And I'm gonna go to my parameters right in the report data pane, and I'm gonna hit add. And in this case, you have two elements. You have the name and you have the prompt. Now for the name, this is what you're gonna be using it to reference it in code. So when we go to do mapping for our query parameter, this is what we're gonna have. We're gonna keep it very simple. I'm just gonna call it fiscal year, no space. I don't even believe it allows you to put in a space in here. It might, no, but I think when we hit OK, it will actually fail. The one that definitely does allow it though is the prompt. The prompt means what is your user gonna see? How are we gonna show this in the actual report itself? So definitely make this look good. It doesn't have to be the same name. I mean, I'm calling it fiscal year, but this could be completely different. I think in one of the first labs that we do for the paginated report in a day, we have employee key as the actual, or for the name, employee key, and the prompt is like salesperson or something of that nature. So whatever you want here. Now in this case, we did create a custom column. It is a text, so I'm gonna leave it as a text. And to start with, since the goal is to actually mimic the report itself, which was a single value parameter, we'll just start with the multi-value option here, just so we can see it, and then we'll kind of change it up to go to the single. And this is the more complicated ones anyways, so we'll start with this. I'll show you how to set it up, and then we'll just change it over to using a single value option. So allow multiple, we're gonna turn on for now. At the moment, we don't have any options for available values. Technically speaking, this is such a simple data set. It's literally fiscal year 2019, 2020, and 21 are actually the only valid values in here. But we're gonna go and do this more dynamic. It's really nice always to get values from a query, but to be honest, if you have a very simple list of values, you know it will never change. That's the key piece here. You could just write them in if you wanted to, that's it. But we're gonna have a actual query, a data set from Power Query drive this available value. So we need to create that now. So for now, I'm gonna just go ahead and I'm gonna put none and hit OK. And let's create our data set, which is gonna populate our report parameter, and then we're gonna tie it all together, right? So let's go ahead. Remember, each get data experience will produce a single data set, so I need to kind of start from the beginning here, hit get data. Beautiful part is, I'm just gonna use the date table that's coming from the actual same file that we have. So because I know where that's located, I can simply go ahead and click on the Excel workbook, but rather than upload it, we can simply hit browse, because now we know where this is located. And just in case I only showed that once, so if you've forgotten, I'll guide you, right? I've sorted this alphabetically, and we're gonna look for the option app. I think it's apps with a S at the end, APPS, there it is. We're gonna go in, there's an option for Microsoft Power Query. Now remember, if you save this yourself somewhere custom, just go wherever that is. This is the default location, uploaded files, and voila. Same exact file that we used before. I'm gonna hit select, and this time it's gonna be a little bit more simplistic. It's remembered our connection settings from before. I only care about one table here. I'm literally gonna go ahead and grab our dim date, and that's it, and hit transform data. And we only care about one column, right? We have this fiscal year column, which we're gonna go ahead. All I'm gonna do, I'm gonna make this real easy. I'm gonna find my fiscal year that is just numeric in nature. I'm gonna right click and remove all other columns. I'm gonna go ahead and do the whole prefixing element, which if you remember, that's under add column, format, add prefix. We're gonna go FY to match what we have in our data set. And we can go ahead and get rid of this. Now here is one thing to consider. Now in this case, right, let's say we go ahead and highlight both of these just to, I think this will better illustrate what I want to get to. I can remove the duplicate. So now we have a unique list of years. This is fantastic. Now granted, years 22, 23, and 24 don't actually provide any results. So if you wanted to take this the full length and be like, hey, I only want to show year values where there's actually like sales, you could do some logic where you go ahead and maybe bring this and combine it with sales. You do an aggregation, and obviously there'll be nulls for 22, 23, 24, and then you could remove nulls. You could go the distance and kind of make this a little bit more dynamic. I know that there's only sales for 19, 20, 21, so technically we could just go ahead and just filter these out. And just to streamline this, I'm gonna do that. But just bringing in and merging in our sales data and seeing what has values and doesn't, that would be another criteria for filtering. Now the thing I'm focusing on, the reason why I've kept this numeric fiscal year here is because of sorting purposes, right? If we just got rid of this in 2019, 2020, if it wasn't already in order, it would be a little bit weird at this point because it's a text character. So potentially, we don't need to do it here because you can see it's actually in order. But let's assume that you needed something that's a little bit more involved, a little bit more out there. You do have a numeric representation here. Something that can be helpful is an index column. You can just add this into the mix and this becomes you can just call it like sort key or something like that. So now, even when I get rid of fiscal year, technically we could just keep it. Fiscal year could be like our sort if you wanted to, but it might not always be this clean when it comes to like tables that you're working with. But now if I needed to make sure this is arranged, because however we bring in this data set, that's how it's actually gonna be sorted in our report parameter. So sorting here actually does matter. And now if something happens, something were to be mixed up, I can just sort by 1, 2, 3. Or maybe you have some sort of custom sorting. This is how you would need to tackle this, right? So here I'm gonna go ahead and relabel this fiscal year. Once again, as I mentioned, this actually is in a nice sorted way, so we are in good shape and good order. So all I'm gonna do is rename this and call this, whenever I'm creating a data set for parameters, I use this little param prefix, and then I put in, fiscal year. Like this is gonna be the name of the parameter that I am basically providing data for. So that's it. This is a very simple data set, right? When it comes to parameters, a lot of time it is that simplistic. The only time it might get a little bit more complicated is when you need to do cascading parameters. If this list of years needed to be filtered by something else, that's when things could get potentially a little bit more involved. But you're gonna see right now, we're gonna look at how do we actually parameterize our queries. So once we've seen this, it's simply about applying that logic at a parameter data set. It's just parameterizing a data set, right? That's it. Well, now we have a second data set here. You can see it on the left-hand side, and this is gonna provide us a list of values for our dropdown, which eventually is gonna be what filters our data set. So let's go ahead and just do that first. I'm gonna revisit our fiscal year parameter here. I'm gonna go to available values, and I'm gonna go ahead and hit get values from a query. And there's only one, param fiscal year. There is 2 columns here, but I'm gonna set both of these to fiscal year. And now if we hit, now granted we don't have any table or anything in here, but if we hit run the report, we're gonna see our parameter at the top has a drop-down list of values that we can choose. And we did make it multi-value, which actually doesn't line up with the report. But like I said, I just wanna show you how you accomplish this. So 3 options that we can pick and choose, and obviously it doesn't show anything right now, but we could go through that process. Let's go ahead and line this up so it actually filters things. Now, just for now, to keep things really straightforward, let's go ahead and just create a super basic table that is gonna just bring in a couple of items. We're just gonna bring our salesperson, our sales, and our target. We want something so we can see how this parameter is actually filtering. I'm gonna right click, I'm gonna go ahead and hit insert, and we're just gonna insert a table. And as mentioned, we're gonna keep this pretty straightforward. I'm gonna bring in our salesperson. We're gonna bring our sales. We're gonna bring in our target. And then, you know what? We're gonna bring in the variance percentage. So we'll go over here, drag this over, and we got the percentage option right here. So this is just for viewing purposes. Technically speaking, we don't have anything parameterized, so if we kind of do this, the only thing that would make sense possibly to kind of break this down, which is this is gonna be a temporary thing, we could go ahead and say, you know what, I wanna group this by my fiscal year, but we'll end up just cleaning this up here in a moment. But since we don't have any filters in play, like actual parameters there, we can at least pop this in here, because when I hit run, we should see our data now broken down for the salespersons by, in this case, like, it doesn't matter what you choose here. This isn't doing anything. Watch, if I just choose 2021, what you're gonna see is 2019 in the first section, and then the salesperson and the respective values. And then 2020, so there's 2019, 2020, 21, right? So we're just doing a simple little example of grouping here to see, are these coming in? Obviously there's some funkiness for formatting. We'll fix that up real quick, but this is just to let us see, hey, is this working? So if our parameter works, we should be able to pick and choose what we want to see, and it should showcase here. So let's leave this in its rudimentary state. Actually, what we'll do is let's fix variance percentage, because that didn't look good, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and go to the text box properties for the variance percentage. So for labeling purposes, usually these columns are numeric. So this column right here is column 1, this is column 2, and then the, rows 1, row 2, and then this will be column A, B, C, D, E. So I'm talking about E2. So I'm gonna go to E2's text box properties, and here you can go under number, and this in this case is gonna be a percentage. If you wanna mess with the decimal places and all that stuff, feel free to go right ahead, but this should look a little bit better here for the sake of just our little sample that we're doing. Like I said, I'm just gonna, for now, just select all. We know it's not doing anything, and it should look a little bit better, because that percentage looked a little bit crazy there. All right, perfect. Yep, that's exactly a little bit better. So let's make the actual filter work. So to do this, we want to go to the actual data set properties here. Now let's go into the actual data set properties, because I want to discuss two things. We are going to use the parameters option here. Technically speaking, we haven't gotten it set up yet to use this yet. We have to get into the actual Power Query editor here to do something. But there is the option to go with filters. Now this is basically not specific to Power Query. This is just Paginated Reports, so this is nothing new. Basically, this says, hey, I want to apply a filter on the returned results from the data set. So the difference between the two things here is we've got our Power Query. It's basically bringing back whatever that table is, how we've defined it. It's gonna bring back all that. So in our case, all 3 years of our sales, target, and our variances, right? It's gonna bring in all 3 years, and then after it's brought all that data over, which isn't a ton, so 41 records, once it's brought that over, then it's gonna filter it by whatever our choice is in the report parameter. The way we're gonna do it is we're effectively gonna alter the Power Query editor code. When a user picks just 2019, it's gonna actually request from the source system just 2019. So that's the difference between filters and a query parameter. Basically, at what point are we actually applying the filter? After the data set returns its information, or during the process of the retrieval of the data set? So did we talk about that a little bit more in depth in both the Paginated Report in a day, and as well as our intro to SSRS and advanced SSRS? So definitely an interesting topic, definitely. But we want to do this, but we're not ready yet, because we need to go into the actual data set, so back to the Power Query editor, and we're going to use parameters here. Now, parameters, some of you, even if you've been using Power Query for a while, maybe you haven't actually used parameters here on this side of things. To be honest, when it comes to using it inside of, let's say, like Power BI, which would be the more classical way you'd be experiencing this, parameters are very much more of a back-end element. We just use it as developers here to control, potentially through the service, what range of information we're looking at. It's a filter on the Power Query editor, but it's more of a developer focus. We don't really ever use it forward-facing. This is also something we use for things like incremental refresh, right? That's what they're leveraged for. There's some reserved parameter names. We still use it in that same kind of light here, right? So let's pick DS main. That's the one we're interested in. And we're going to create a parameter which is going to leverage and work on that fiscal year column. So the idea is I can pass a year through. The idea is we need something to go ahead and basically do this. I only want to look at 2019. But obviously this is me physically going through the act, applying a filter here. We need this to be dynamic. But this is technically what we would want returned. So how do we do this? Well, we go over to the Manage Parameters section here, and we have none, so I'm gonna hit Manage, and we're gonna create a new item. Let's go ahead and just call this fiscal year, keep it nice and easy. What is the what you wanna put a description? Is it gonna be required? What is the data type? You do wanna be specific here. Now this is important because this is the difference between a single value parameter and a multi-value. At this point, we've decided, hey, we wanna allow the person to pick multiple years. So we're going the multi-value parameter. We already configured it in the report parameter, but now we need to do it here. And to do this, you actually have to use the list option, right? So we choose list. You don't actually have to put any values. This does make it a little bit funky on the Power Query editor because you're gonna see in a moment, once we apply this is all we need to do here. This is the only requirement. Once we do this, we need to apply it. Well, we have a parameter. What column should this impact? So it's not doing anything. You can see there's a new object. I go back to DS main, I say, you know what? I wanna parameterize my fiscal year. So we say, okay, I wanna go ahead, I'm gonna hit the drop down here, which gives me the filter option. And you can see it says text filters. And if you were to do a single value filter, it would be equals. If you want a multi-value parameter, we're gonna do in. And you're gonna see right off the bat, it tells me, you wanna do an in filter on this year, you need to choose a list parameter. We just happen to have created a list parameter. So it wouldn't even show up here if it wasn't of the correct data type. So I choose fiscal year, I hit okay, and this is technically done. Now, because I don't have any values in the actual fiscal year, this looks like it's blank, like it's bringing in no data. Technically, that is the case. We haven't given it anything to filter on, right? But that's fine. If you wanted this to actually show stuff so you can do a little more troubleshooting, you could go through here and populate values FY 2019, FY 2020. But once again, you do not have to. We've effectively filtered this, and I will show you right now how it's working. So I hit create, right? This updates this. It's gonna give us a little notation. But we have one more thing to accomplish. We need to map it. We've got a report parameter. This is a forward-facing object that users interact with. We want to take whatever that choice is and pass it through to this parameter now that is on the Power Query editor side. This process is actually very similar to just mapping any sort of parameters, but we need to go into the, once again, data set properties, go into the parameter section. At this point, technically, you could do the filters too, but I'm gonna go to parameters and hit add. Now on the right-hand side, what we get is a list of our actual parameters that are available to us from the actual data set itself. And all I need to do, this is actually my report parameter, and what I need to do is give the name, here on the left, the name of the parameter that we just defined in the Power Query editor. You wanna make sure it's here, case sensitive. You know, if you forgot, you can go back in the mashup, but we kept it simple, fiscal year. So the name of the parameter we created in the Power Query editor. And this is it, we've now mapped it, right? It now knows where to send this information. So to validate this, right, we can go right over here, hit run. We can hit the drop down here, and I'm gonna, just to make it easy, I'm gonna choose, to prove the multi-value, we're gonna choose 2020, 21. So if we run this, we should see no 2019, which we know it started like that before. So we run this, give it a second, 2020, 2021. That's it. This is gonna be our multi-value. And of course, just in case for anyone who maybe was working with this in the previous state, there was a little bit of an issue when using list parameters, where if you only included one value in the list, it actually didn't work. It would actually fail. So that was a bit of an issue. Now, if you don't include anything, this does cause an issue, right? You might think like, oh, I just want everything. If you want everything, you need to make sure you hit select all. So they have addressed the issue of only supplying one value in a list, which is great. That's what we would expect. So this is our multi-value. Once again, it doesn't really line up with what we did. That's kind of what's in the lab. So we're gonna go ahead and just refactor this so you can kind of, be familiar with a single value option. So the way we're gonna do this is you can kind of do it in whatever order you'd like. Let's go ahead and I'm gonna modify my fiscal year, and I'm gonna choose and deselect multi-value. We'll hit okay. And then we'll go over here and also go through the process of editing our mashup.
And we're gonna go to, and let's do the whole thing where we reconnect. And we're gonna basically locate our parameter here, right? Our parameter object at the very end we know is of a list data type. So if we hit manage, we can look at it. Remember, if we want to do a specific value, we just specify the data type. So we're going to pass text values through. This will actually cause a little bit of an issue here. If you wanted, once again, like an actual, like if you want this to show up with some sort of filter, you could put like FY 2019 here, so you could actually see something in the data set, but I'm going to leave it blank. But as soon as we go back to the data set itself, you're going to see there's going to be a little bit of an issue here on the actual parameter. You can see we cannot convert the value blank to type list. There's an issue with the actual parameter itself. So if we just go here, where you have the filtered option at the bottom, it brings up where we were applying our actual filter on the parameter. And we simply have to switch this, instead of an in statement, we just go to equals. That's it. That's all we need to do. That's what that error is addressing. Granted, we didn't put any default value, so we still show up with a blank here. That's okay. Like I said, if you want to see something because you want to kind of keep validating, just put in a value for the default. That's it, right? Technically, you could go in here and say, hey, I want to edit this, and I could put in FY 2019, right? And this is me adding a value to that, and I would actually see results being returned here. So your choice on how you want to implement this. Generally, it's a choice. Do you want to have a current value or not? I like to leave it blank. I don't know, just ready to receive a value, but there's really no issue on supplying a value or not. So it's updated. We've switched it. All right, now it's all set. We have the report parameter all defined. We can just go ahead and run this, and we can choose a year in question and run this. Now, just in case, I have seen some oddities. If you go to the mashup and you're pretty sure you've done everything correctly and you hit create, it tells you it's updated. I have had some nuances where I'm moving from the query editor back into the paginated report kind of experience. And I might even notice that maybe a new column I'm supposed to have there didn't show up. Sometimes that's in the case. Remember how we have to reconnect to the source system? I've seen it where sometimes maybe if you go too quickly, kind of hitting create, it doesn't actually capture that in. So if it's looking odd, you get a message saying it didn't evaluate correctly, just go back into the mashup editor, allow yourself to reconnect to it, make sure everything loads and validate things, of course, and then try hitting create again so it updates that actual data set, and it could be as simple as that. I've seen a generic query execution failure. I just go back into the mashup engine, and all I basically do is create it again, don't do anything, and it functions. But you can see our single value selection here is working as intended. It's got everything set. It's exactly how we would want and expect it to be. So, of course, in this grand scheme of things, we really wouldn't need our grouping here. So I'm going to delete the group in there. Technically, the way that this is being done is by our country. So we have our sales territory group. We could go in here and do something like this. This is matching more of what the lab actually does. It actually ends up formatting this a little bit better. And the idea also is say, hey, you know what? I want to go ahead and keep, even though the report parameter is visible, sometimes it's nice to go ahead and add some visibility. So this is just straight up paginated report. This is nothing fancy. This is nothing special, if you will. But we can go into this little text box under here, hit expression, just to showcase, like I said, how to get the value of our selected parameter and populate it here, and do something like this. I'm just gonna type this code out. It's gonna be, let's go ahead and trim. What do we wanna trim? Well, from my parameter section, I'm gonna take my fiscal year, and let's go ahead. It doesn't really matter in this case. Our label and value are the same, but it's always a good practice usually to go with label. Once again, remember how when we set up our parameter and we had the available values, and you had two columns to choose from. The example was employee key and salesperson name. That's from the first labs in the paginated report in a day. In that case, the label would have been the salesperson name, the value would be the key. So what would you want to show here? Probably the salesperson name. So in our case, it was the same column for both, so it actually doesn't matter, but it's a good practice to kind of probably go with label here. It's usually pretty common. And now when a user makes this choice, because remember, this could be printed out. This little section at the top here, where we have our parameters, isn't going to be included in that printout, right? So having this visibility here saying, hey, obviously, because I've now removed 2019 from that list, we can see that right here, this is how it's broken down, right? So there's 2019, we can see that information here. If I go to 2021, I think there's a bit more broken down by groups, there's way more. And there's other things, of course, we could get into, but at this point, right, at this stage, We've discussed how to connect the data, the Power Query Editor, that was the new part, how to leverage parameters against the Power Query Editor. These are the key things that are new, that are different about the experience that I really want to show you. Going in and using the SSRS or the Paginated Report expression language, that's not new to this at all. At this point, formatting this, getting this look good, adding conditional formatting, getting sales totals, that's all Paginated Reports. But there is one thing to understand, and I want to mention this. If you notice, variance percentage, right? If I right click this, we have the ability of going and adding a total. If you notice, well, target is an aggregation, right? We don't see add total here. In the lab, it basically says, hey, go ahead and select all three of these and add a total. If you do this, you're gonna see it just brings in the one. So what is the nuance there? Once again, this is something where inside the Power Query Editor, we did all this aggregation. So it's kind of looking at this as just a detail level item. If you wanted those total lines to show up, it'd be a very simple manner of going in here, going into the expression, and simply adding a sum in front of these values, because we don't have the line item detail, so it's perfectly fine. And I can do that for target as well. And this lets and informs the actual paginated report itself know that this is an aggregation. Right, you gotta type it right. And this would give me the ability of adding column totals here, right? So you can get all three. So that's just one other thing due to the nature of how we brought this data in and kind of transformed it that we would need to do to accomplish this. So something I wanted to showcase, but at this point, right, this is where that challenge came in, right? Moving through the rest of the lab, going through those items, using the features that Paginated Report has offered us for years, that hasn't changed. So all that great capability, all that dynamic elements of using the expression language is at your disposal. At this point, this is simply a Paginated Report data set that you can leverage and take advantage as you see fit. The main thing here was now we can connect to so many different options and so many different choices. And with that being said, in this example, hopefully you can see why I'm so excited about this topic, right? Power Query Editor just offers us at our fingertips just such powerful transformational capabilities. The entire Power Query Editor at our disposal. As mentioned, there's definitely going to be scenarios where it makes sense to use Power BI, but the best part is these are transferable skill sets, Power Queries in both areas. But what do we need to do? Do you need to create Power BI reports, the traditional interactive reports? Then of course, go through that process, create those semantic models, and import and leverage them inside of Paginated Reports. Now, for many of you who've gone through that process, you'll know that this uses the Analysis Services Query Designer, and it uses DAX on the background to create that query. And if you've only done calculated measures and columns, the DAX that we find in the Paginated Report is a little bit different. We effectively work with table functions, and that might not be as a comfortable area as you might expect. We do have a class on our on-demand learning, of course, that focuses on DAX for Paginated Reports, so definitely something to check out because there are some kind of little trickeries in there, right? But in this case, in this regard, if you know you don't need to go that route, if you're not gonna create interactive Power BI reports, you just want that kind of operational line item feel, just strictly Paginated Reports, because that's what the audience would benefit most from. You don't need to go through some extra steps. Just use and leverage the Power Query as expected. You got parameterization as you'd expect. And as you can imagine, everything else follows exactly the same. You can still deploy this out to a workspace. You can schedule it for refresh purposes if need be. You can embed this in Power BI reports. All of that remains the same. This is a monumental change to Paginated Reports. Other than the ability of connecting to semantic models, we've really been left with the same report builder since almost like 2016. Been quite a bit. But that shows you this reporting style has been a need for well over a decade, and it continues to be that way. That's why this still exists. That's why it is part of the core Power BI reporting experience within the service itself. So if you haven't gone down this avenue, if you know you have some reporting requirements there, and it is very much tabular in nature, maybe the audience is a bit more traditional, they are gonna want either a printout or an export, or you wanna supply attachments to subscriptions that have entire tables of data and information based off of filter criteria, Paginated Reports is going to be the resource for you. So as always, hopefully you guys enjoyed. You have a new sense of excitement around Paginated Reports, and this will help you in your adventures in exploring that area and extending your knowledge and bringing some new reports to your organization so that the users can consume and enjoy. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.